Hey guys, still here and welcome to the 101st Airborne. It's a new division, part of the Nemesis DLC, or at least the first of the Nemesis DLC. The Russians also got a new division, but this time we're looking at the 101st. Quick overview of the deck. It's set around mobility and speed, not necessarily staying power. You're going to find out in the form of it has no tanks. First though, logistics. You got a couple of new supply vehicles. You got the M274 Mule and the 561 Supply Goat. These are funny looking vehicles. Don't underestimate their speed. They're 54 kilometers. That's pretty quick. You also got the Supply Mule over here doing 45. It looks like a much improved golf caddy with a bunch of supplies. And the lovely thing about these is you get a lot of them, so you can sprinkle them around. Outside of that, you also get a Supply UH-60, you get the CH-47, and of course you're able to get a couple of different command units. Now what I did with this particular deck is get the 274 so that I can get them in very cheaply, get a couple of new, let's say, anti-tank weapons or maybe some infantry, resupply a squad and get them back into the fight. And if I lose the vehicle, it's no big deal. The supply is there mostly to reach potentially farther away areas or to resupply the supply mule. And then the command helicopter. This one can be a bit of a point of contention because it might be something that's easily killed off. I have also had it happen that these things boost the efficacy of the other helicopters quite a bit, and that might make up for their value. So in that sense, they're definitely capable of being valuable. But if you got a big map and you are just flying straight to the front line, you will not be, of course, able to get the command points in the middle, or at least between you and the destination. So a Humvee for that point might be more beneficial. Infantry. Lots and lots of options. You have, of course, fire support units in the form of the M60 as well as the M2. Which one you take, I'd say, is much up to you. I'd say these units are well, quite similar, really. You're getting an M60 or you're getting a 50 cal. The 50 cal has more range but less accuracy. When you're looking at suppression, I do value the suppression factor that the 50 cal, so the 12.7mm, can give you. And that's why I went with that. As for the other units, we got M67 Patrolman. Well, rather, military police patrol. Either with just an M60 or an M67. Sprinkle these guys around your sides if you're afraid of having units infiltrate. They're pretty cheap. They can also be used to recover morale faster because they're military police. Then we come up to the Aero Rifle, or at least the Aero Fire teams. Not necessarily the same as the Aero Rifles. These are generally smaller groups. It's a 3-man squad. It's a 5-man squad. This one's armed with the AT-4. Perfectly capable of going up against anything that they come up against close range. This thing has the Standoff Dragon 2. And with that, does have advantages. You can reach out and touch a vehicle at 1.5 kilometers. The downside, you are going to be looking at a minimum range. So don't push these guys into a tree line and expect that they will defeat, let's say, the BMP-1 that happens to get right in front of them. Because they can't. For that, you need the AT-4. As for the Aero Fire team, armed with a sniper rifle, they might be keeping some infantry off of them, but I think that's about it. As for this new mule, this is the more firepower armed version of the mule, and it has a recoilless rifle. This is something that you can throw into a point where the enemy might not have that many armored units. They might not have a lot of fire support, but they do have a couple of infantry squads that are considering going out into the open. This might help. For 45 points, it's not expensive. You can afford to lose it, really. The problem is, it is very, very fragile. As you can see, it has no armor. Because of that, even infantry squads can take this thing down. So, while it might be useful, I haven't really found a good use for it yet. Aero Rifles, then. We have the Aero Rifles leader, your standard Aero Rifles, armed with the M72 Law and 2 M60s. The Dragon one, armed with the lighter M249s, but 2 of them, and the Dragon. And we have the Aero Rifles with the AT-4. I have them over here. These guys pack 6 and they're a 13-man squad. I found that with the 3 M249s, they are definitely far more capable of deploying a bunch of staying power. and they are also a hardened shock troop. This is definitely useful in close quarters, especially forest fighting. I found that these guys are very capable of clearing both infantry and vehicle from forests. Engineers leaders, basic leader force, as well as the aero engineers, very specialized. They can deal with infantry like nothing else, but they cannot deal with anything else either. That satchel charge, great weapon against infantry, doesn't do a thing when you come up against a vehicle. So keep that in mind. If you're going to send in the aero engineers to deal with, for example, a forest that you need cleared, send these boys in, but potentially blend them in with an AT4 fire team so that you have some anti-tank capability up close. Otherwise, even one BMP can really ruin your day. Then we have a couple of new infantry units. We got the Green Beret Leader. This is a new Special Forces unit. They have 3 M249s, they have a Colt Commando SMG, and they have a couple of, and this is somewhat surprising for me, an M72 Law, which is a rather outdated anti-tank weapon. Yes, against the BMP it can still definitely hold its own, but outside of that, like, you're not going to surprise a tank with this. But then again, I don't think that that's necessarily the task of the Green Beret Leader. For that, they have the Green Beret ODAs, Operational Detachment Alpha. These are new units with, yes, 4 slots. Assault rifle, light support weapon, a sniper rifle, and an anti-tank weapon. It's a 14-man squad, and you're paying a lot for these guys. You're paying 100 points, and that's just the infantry unit. So you can see that I'm paying 165 to get these guys in. That is a lot of points that they need to recoup. Of course, you can sell off the Chinook, but even the Chinook is a bit special, because it's an MH47 Delta Chinook. It's armed with a minigun, and it does have 20% ECM. I have had it happen that I had an Igla squad, an enemy Igla squad, of course. This guy flew in, took a missile, started laying down suppressive fire with the miniguns, and fortunately, quickly the ODA was able to catch up, the Green Berets, and knocked out the Igla. I've also had it happen that a helicopter like a DAP also has 20% ECA and actually won against an Igla team. So this 20% ECM is not something that you can discard. If you're facing an MH47 Delta, it's definitely going to take you a bit more time to knock this thing out of the sky. And then you got your Aero TOW 2 rifles, or Aero TOW 2 HGMs. Very good accuracy. You got either the Gamma Goats, or you got your Black Hawks. Because you get quite a bit of availability, I'm only using 2 cards of 3. I've decided that I want 1 in a Black Hawk. This is generally going to be used in an opener. And this one is going to be used in a situation where I might already have an established front line and I need another tow unit, but I don't want to be spending 160 points on it. As for the setup that I have over here, and I'm not saying this is a great setup, this is a setup that I'm still working on. I have the aero rifles with the Dragon. These are somewhat standoff-ish and might be used to flank a road. Because they're in a Black Hawk, they can respond to threats quickly. They're, in that sense, also a quick response force. If I either see a flank of mine that needs another unit, or if I'm seeing that there is a potential breakthrough on the enemy's side, where I can deploy potentially a couple of units to hold a new bit of buildings. Then we got the Humvee with the aero rifles. Yeah, it's a bit of a weird mix. Not necessarily aero, that is. But these guys are a cheap command unit. They're 110 points. Of course, your command helicopter at 75, is cheaper. But it's also a lot more obvious. These guys at least can sneak in with the rest of the troops. They have a 9-man strength and with that are a bit survivable. Then we have the ODA, which I just discussed. I have the Aero TOW 2 in the Black Hawk, and I have them in the Goat, as discussed. I have the Chinook with the Green Beret Leader. Again, it's the MH47D, not your box standard Chinook. It's a different transport, and that ECM is something that you simply don't find on the standard Chinook. You find 10% there, and it is unarmed. These guys are ideally used in a bit of a combination with other troops. Yes, they can hold their own, if need be, but ideally they won't. They're there to boost the efficiency of everybody else around them, like, for example, a Green Beret troop, and also potentially like additional units such as the aero rifles, or the aero fire team, or the aero rifles with the AT4. These guys, somewhat more situational. Only use them if you have a situation locked down. Arrow engineers. I do want to have at least some specialists that are really good at clearing out enemy infantry, either in a town or in a forest. They might get backup from the arrow rifles in the AT-4, but the arrow rifles in the AT-4 can also be flown in with the Chinook pretty quick to, at least early game, grab a building that might be close to a tree line or close to a road where I can ambush something using those AT-4s. And then finally we have the arrow fire teams. That's a smaller group, just 5 guys with 4 AT-4s, capable of again ambushing or filling up gaps. Now, is this setup going to be ideal? No, I don't believe there is an ideal setup because every map is going to be different, every playstyle is going to be different. You might prefer more dragons, somebody might prefer to flood the battlefield with the military police. I don't think that there is an ideal. Of course, there will be a meta. This might not be it, but this is the way that I have the deck set up. Arty, not a whole lot of options. You got the Arrow M252 81mm or an M30 with 107mm. The good news is they can come in with this very cheap goat, which again does not have any armor. Be very careful. Although, if your artillery is taking fire, something went wrong. We also have the M102 and the M198. This is the 155mm. This is the shorter and also shorter ranged 14 kilometer 105mm. The good news is you can fly them in. These guys, not so much. But I have found that the M35 is no slouch. It can get to locations pretty quickly. I personally use this one to snipe high-value targets, and in this case of this deck, that might also mean enemy anti-air positions. Iglas, stuff like that, they need to go, and that's when these guys come in very useful. I haven't actually used the M102s yet, because I haven't had a situation for it yet. As for your mortars, you can definitely call those in. I just have, at least until now, elected not to. Now, as I mentioned, early game or early video, your staying power is limited. You got the M1IPs. I have selected to go with 4 of them, so that if I lose them, it's not half my force. And I've set them at least some veterancy. Otherwise, they're going to be completely green. They'll have very little stress resistance, which in case of a tank is not good, because a tank is likely to get shot at. I want to have at least a couple of tanks so I can provide some fire support, deal with some enemy transports, and as such be able to relieve some pressure on my infantry. Also in here is the M1IP Abrams command unit. Very good tank, at least compared to what you have. It's a good tank. It is expensive, it's 270 points. It's a command tank that gives you some options that other units along the command line probably won't have. But I personally have not yet elected to bring it in. I might swap out one of the M1IPs and bring in an M1AP Abrams command. But the reason I don't have it is because I find these generally present somewhat less of a focal point for enemy players. When people see that star from the command, they tend to start prioritizing it, which also means I will lose the fire support that my infantry has. As such, an M1IP is not as threatening, and that's what I like to stick to. You also got a TOW 2 option here in the form of the Humvee TOW 2, as well as the Mule. Yes, this thing comes equipped with an ITO launcher. Could be a very nice ambusher. They have a good level of stealth and a 2625 meter range with a 20 pen. This is not a missile you can easily ignore. If you're able to buff their veterancy even more, their accuracy is going to go up even more, and they will most likely give the enemy definitely some worries. Of course, you can fire a missile and then scoot. Not necessarily while the missile is in the air, but you can present a threat area, if you will. Have the enemy already hammer that position, and of course, by that time, you will be long gone, because you're not going to stick around waiting for that arty shell to come in onto your, well, mostly unarmored vehicle. Recce, we have some interesting units here. Sniper teams, not that special. Great units to use behind enemy lines. They can pick off some armored / let's say anti-air units with their M24 and their M21. They don't strictly have a lot of AP capability. So they're good spotters. In fact, they're excellent spotters. But what they do not have is the ability to really deal with enemy armor. Delta also doesn't have that. they're another recon unit that you have access to. These guys, I'd say, are more of a fighting infantry squad, but not against vehicles. Because they do have this submachine gun and 2 M249 light support weapons, but they have a sniper rifle, no anti-tank weapon. This means that if you're just trying to actively scout, you might come up against a vehicle. These guys are not necessarily the right call. That would be probably the Aero Scouts here. The Aero Scouts are armed with the M72 Law, so at least they can defeat a vehicle if they come across it. They also got the M60, which does more suppressive damage relative to the Delta Force. Sorry, no, the Deltas have 2 M249, so they get more suppressive value. I'm using these in an active scout role, and I currently have a lot of them in the Humvee. I can much easier transport them in the Blackhawk and get to my destination a heck of a lot faster. Having them in 2 different vehicles gives me more options. The other unit that you see over here is the Quick Fix. It's an interesting unit. What it does is jam enemy units. It downgrades the optics of any enemy recon unit equipped with radar. That means gentlemen like these, the GSR, or the Ground Surveillance Radar. They're not the only unit to have it, but at least in this deck they are. This is going to give the units 1 level of optics additional. I'd say that makes the Quick Fix very situational, because if the enemy is not using a GSR, a Ground Surveillance Radar, you might argue that this unit's a bit useless. However, 40% ECM does give it survivability. Aside from that ECM, they also have very good optics. That's very useful. So if you tandem this with an Apache, for example, this thing is going to be very capable of potentially attracting missiles and promptly deflecting them, as well as support for the Apache. So in that sense, I have found these to be pretty useful scouts, and they're only 60 points. Now the other unit that we have over here are the Kiowa as well as the Kiowa Warrior. Pretty standard units. You can find these in definitely some of the other American options as well. I personally have selected the Kiowa Warrior so that if I find a high value target, I can hit it with a Hellfire. If you don't want to have something worth 120 points flying around, you can get the Kiowa Standard, but it only comes with 14 rocket pods. It might kill a command unit, but that's about it. As for your Delta Squad, I haven't really found a good use for them. That's a bit of a problem. I'm still figuring out exactly where I should have these guys on my front line, because I feel that they are a frontline unit. I'm just not sure yet where. So if you do, leave me a comment down below. How would you use the Delta team? Anti-air. Pretty straightforward. You got your Stingers, but you can at least fly them in with a Blackhawk. And these Stingers are the Stinger posts. They're very accurate. You can also, if you see fit, drive them in either with a Humvee or with the Mule. Take note that the Humvee is a lot faster. But this thing at least has mediocre optics. So arguably that might be worth a couple points. I'd say it's not that valuable. And maybe, well, no, they're both pretty unarmored, so dead is dead in this case. As for other anti-air options, we have the M167A2 Pivads. Interesting option. It's a stationary Vulcan gun. I was planning on flying it in with a Chinook, because with the Chinook, deploying this thing early is going to be a nasty surprise to enemy helicopters and infantry. Don't discard this thing against infantry, because at 1200 meter range, it means you'll be able to suppress, if not eliminate, most of the enemy infantry that happens to come to a position that you might want to keep. So if you can find a good position where this thing is hidden just behind, let's say, a tree line, but still has some line of sight on a road, this might be a useful option. We also got the OH-58CS with the Stingers, and we have the Chaparral. I have selected the OH-58 because it gives me a bit more flexibility. It also gives you far fewer missiles. And this thing fires the Stingers, this thing fires the M1M 72G. Far better range, far more missiles. But then again, in this deck, I prefer my maneuverability. And that also goes hand in hand with the helos. You got the little birds, both the AH-6F and the G. Now, if you compare these side by side, they're mostly similar. It's just that the G... here we go. The G gets another weapon, which is the GAU-19. That is a very nice suppressive weapon, and especially combined with the minigun, it can cause all sorts of issues for the enemy infantry. They get a whole 5 Hydra additional missiles, and, well, in order to get that GAU, they are going to sacrifice 1 minigun. Neither of these helos get any ECM. That means that they're very likely to get shot down, and, well, they might be very nimble and very small, but I think that they're very limited in their utility, but I could be wrong about that. At least I haven't had a whole lot of success with it. What I have had success with is the third guy on this row, and that's the DAP. This DAP is a Black Hawk armed with a couple of M230s, or rather, in this case, one M230 and the other wing has a Hydra rocket pod. It also comes with a couple of miniguns. This is the helicopter that I've had go up against an England team and win, because it also comes with 20% ECM. This thing is very useful when you're dealing with units of infantry that are not covered by any anti-air, and this will knock them down very, very quickly. The Heavy Hog will too. This thing is armed with a couple of Zuni rocket pods. Those are the big ones at 127mm. The AH-1F Cobra, box standard Cobra, just a lot more of the 70mm rocket pods. And then the ones I have selected are the Tow Cobras. The reason for the Tow Cobra is that it's flexible. Like, it's a Swiss Army knife. You got a rotary cannon, capable of dealing with infantry and some light vehicles. You have ITOs, which can definitely kill even the strongest of tanks, as long as you get the right angle on them. And then you got a couple of air-to-ground pods, not a whole lot. Like, you just get 14 shots, but that might just be enough to stun a vehicle or stun or lock, let's say, an infantry unit, and take it out of commission. I get 4 of these just to make sure that if I lose one, it's not the end of the world. As for the Apaches, well, you get a lot of them. Unfortunately, one card, so let's say one click, is only one Apache. And this goes for the whole column, sorry, the whole line. So I got the basic Apache rocket pod, you got the Apache A with Hellfires and rocket pods. And then we got the Apache ATAS, armed with not only Hellfires, but also Stingers. This makes it, as far as I'm concerned, a great opener, because I'm capable of engaging enemy helicopters. Maybe because the enemy helicopters knocked out, I can then prevent a landing of some infantry. And if that infantry is going to still be an issue, I can take it out with a rotary cannon. If there is an enemy vehicle around, I don't mind putting a Hellfire right through it, just to make sure that I'm capable of getting to the buildings first. Even if my units might be arriving in Humvees, this does give me some options. So that's why I have 2 of these ATAS. And then the last one is just your sheer tank killer, 16 Hellfires, in case you're going up against, I don't know, all of the T-80UDs. Finally, we have the air tab. Not a whole lot of exciting stuff in here. You look at Phantoms. This is the air-to-air Phantom. This is the HE Phantom with 227 kilogram bombs. And we have napalms. Not particularly special. This bird, the Raven EW, is. It's an unarmed, yes, unarmed, no harm missiles hidden, and electronic warfare plane. This thing is going to disrupt enemy radars. And that means that enemy radar units, so not infrareds, just enemy radar units, are going to get hit by a 20% accuracy debuff. Could be very useful to fly this thing in if you want to hit something with your helicopters. But keep in mind, infrared is not affected. This does mean that your helicopters are still very much at risk from enemy iglas, but this thing I have found can also soak up some missiles because it has 60% ECM. And with that, it might just be able to soak up the missiles so your helicopters don't have to. I have one of these things at Elite. The reasoning is that if it does take a hit, it will likely survive because it has 10 strength. And then it's going to recover with the stress recovery at 3 points per second relatively quickly when compared to the Veteran. You can also make the case, I want to have 2 of these, and that means if I lose one, I still have some EW remaining. So far, in the couple of games that I've played, I've never had this thing shot down, despite throwing it pretty deep into enemy airspace. Even fighters chasing this thing are going to have a very hard time hitting it. As for the rest of your air wing, you got the F1F... Oh, sorry, the F111F, which just comes with the, let's say, the carpet bomb loadout, 12 227s, and we have the F-15C fighter. Nothing really special there, and as you might note, you have no anti-tank options in the air tab. This means you're going to have to knock out your tanks using the Hellfires mounted on your helicopters, the tow missiles mounted somewhere on your infantry, whether even being flown in or driven in, up to you, your short-range anti-tank capabilities with the AT-4, maybe your Abrams can handle it, and otherwise you got the tow Humvee. You have options. You just don't have them mounted on a plane. Now this is the way that I have the battle group set up. As I mentioned, it is not necessarily the best. My thinking with this battle group is, I'm going to have an opener, probably with a fire team covering off an exit or an entrance to a particular area. I'm going to have a tow 2 unit being flown in by a Black Hawk. And potentially with that, also either a Dragon or a full-size aerial rifle AT-4. These guys are going to get backed up by an EH-60A quick fix, which might be able to soak up the enemy, let's say, air-to-air missiles from an Mi-24 VAA unit. It's also going to get escorted by, most likely, the Apache ATAS. If I have the budget, maybe an OH-58 CS. And I'm going to open with 1, potentially 2 Eagles. This way, I will have an early look at if the enemy is using fighters. I might be able to start shooting down helicopters early. And, of course, the rest of my package will arrive. When it comes to ground-based recon, I will most likely deploy a sniper to see if it can get through the enemy lines. And then we're going to start coloring the lines in. So I'll be able to drive in another tow unit. I'll be able to drive in a Dragon unit to make sure... Or sorry, fly in a Dragon unit, making sure that I can hold on to the buildings that maybe I have just captured. And that are definitely going to come under greater and greater strain from the enemy units. As for the tow Cobras, Swiss Army knives, they're very flexible. They can be used pretty much at any moment. The DAPs I have found to be very useful both in openers and more mid-game, because the enemy might not have all the AA in place. And the Raven is useful pretty much everywhere except early game, because early game it doesn't really jam much. The enemy might not have their big anti-air units set up yet, and as such the Raven doesn't have anything to jam. So in that case, I generally bring this mid to late game, also when I have the points for it. Now, I'll export this deck code and put it down below in the description. Let me know what your thoughts are down below in the comments. If you have any questions on it, let me know. Maybe I can help. And if there is anything that you would definitely do different, or that completely doesn't fit your style, please let me know down below in the comments. As long as you can make it constructive and we can have a good discussion about it, I'm all ears. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know what your thoughts are on the new 101st Airborne, and I'll see you soon for more videos.